As you probably already know, I want to talk this morning about forgiveness. This is an issue that's come up for me recently, and so I decided I needed to address it, not only for myself, but perhaps for other folks. So I began, like I usually do, to prime the pump by going to the Merriam-Webster dictionary to see what Merriam-Webster's had to say about forgiving and forgiveness. Number one, to give up resentment. I thought forgiving was about some other things like anger and the mistakes we made, but to give up resentment and to grant relief from payment. We've all heard about that, forgiving a debt, that kind of thing. Or to cease to feel resentment against a person or an event. That's part of forgiveness. And then forgiving, willing or able to forgive. To let go any resentment or to stop feeling the resentment. Or allowing room for error or weakness. We all know that we're human beings, we make mistakes, and if we're forgiving people, we allow that. Because we all know we do it, and we try to be forgiving as God is forgiving of us. So then I went to Strong's Concordance, the one that weighs about 10 pounds, to find out how many times forgiving and words related to that are mentioned in the Bible. 112. That's not too bad. Not as many as praying, not as many as love, a few less than preaching, but pretty important. I've titled this message 70 times 7, and as you probably remember, this comes out of Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 and 22, where Peter comes and says to Jesus, this is the King James Version, "Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee 7 times, but 70 times 7. That's 490, by the way. Now here's the New Revised Standard Version, same 2 verses. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. So the New Revised Standard Version lets you off the hook a little bit. 77 is a lot fewer than 490. So Peter must have already had a problem with somebody or was expecting to have a difficulty with somebody, so he was asking Jesus ahead of time, how many times do I forgive when somebody has wronged me? It's interesting to think about what Jesus didn't ask Peter. He didn't ask him what happened. He didn't ask if the other person was deserving of being forgiven. He didn't put any conditions on the other person. Well, you can forgive them if they do X, Y, Z, or if they do this or they do that. He didn't offer no excuses, just forgive 70 times 7. I imagine Peter was kind of surprised. That's another part of the story that we don't really know, but I think that's a really tough order, to be constantly, if somebody is wronging you all the time, to be constantly forgiving them 70 times 7. That's a tall order, and I'm not sure I could do it. I think I might take myself out of the situation because I'd get tired of it and just leave. So I wouldn't have to be forgiving this person over and over and over and over and over and over again. There are other things that Jesus doesn't say about this situation. He doesn't say that we must be buddy-buddy with the forgiven. We can forgive somebody, but we don't have to be bosom buddies with them. He doesn't say that we have to continue the relationship. We can forgive somebody and not be friends with them. It doesn't say that we must forget the wrong. That's impossible. You hear all the time, well, forgive and forget. Forgiving is one part of it. It's impossible to forget. The important thing to remember about that is that there was probably a lesson there, and you don't want to forget the lesson, even if the wrong doesn't affect your life anymore. So, the last thing I want to say about 70 times 7 is perhaps we shouldn't take it literally. Perhaps Jesus was saying, this is really important for you. And so he exaggerated the numbers to get this point across. We do that a lot. So, but think about it. That's a tall order. And I think he's saying that it's not about the other person. We're forgiving somebody, but it's not about them. We don't expect them to change. We don't expect them to do anything differently. It's about us. It heals us. Because if we hang on to our resentment and anger, it makes us sick. It's not healthy to hang on to your anger and your resentment. It gets in the way of your life. And it's a heavy burden sometimes. I'm not saying that you can do it immediately. Sometimes it takes a while to get to that point. It might take years. But eventually, for our own sake, it's good to be a forgiving person. We know this from the Lord's Prayer. And I want to give you a couple of versions of the Lord's Prayer. The King James and the New Revised Standard Version, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. The New English Version, forgive us the wrongs we have done as we forgive those who have wronged us. And the Good News Bible also puts it that way. The J.B. Phillips in Modern English says, forgive us what we owe to you as we have also forgiven those who owe anything to us. And then our unfamiliar, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. I have to share a little story about that with you. Several years ago, for about 9 months, I sang with the Presbyterian Church Choir. And of course, they recite the Lord's Prayer every service, but they say debt. For the life of me, I could not remember to say debt. I would be determined at the beginning of the prayer that I was going to remember to say debts, and then I would get involved in the prayer like I always do, and the trespasses came out of my mouth every time. So one or the other of the altos sitting on either side of me would poke me and then tease me later about that. And finally I said to them, you're just going to have to forgive me my trespasses. Okay. I want to share some other stories with you about forgiveness. One of my favorite movies is called Cry the Beloved Country with James Earl Jones and Richard Harris. It's set in South Africa in the 40s, at the time when apartheid was still present there. And the young black men and some women were leaving their villages and going to Johannesburg, going to the city to find work. And so James Earl Jones plays the part of an older black priest whose son and some of his family have gone and they've lost touch with each other. So he goes to Johannesburg to look for his son. And there's a young priest who's helping him because he's never been to the city. He's pretty bewildered by all the people and the activity and the speed with which things move. So there's this young priest who's helping him look for his son. It takes them quite a while because they just seem like they're one step behind him all the time. And finally they're told that he was sent to a boys' reformatory because he got into trouble. They go to the reformatory hoping to find him, only to discover that he's been released early on good behavior, which is a good thing, but also that his girlfriend is pregnant by him. So the guy that's running the reformatory takes them to where they're living, and the son is not there, but the girl is. She doesn't know where the son's name is Absalom. She doesn't know where he is. He's been gone for 3 days, and she doesn't know anything about where he's gone or when he's going to be back. So the young priest is getting a little impatient with the whole thing, and he says to the old priest, you can do nothing here. You have enough trouble of your own. And the old priest kind of shakes his head. The young priest said, there are thousands like her in Johannesburg. You do not understand. Her child will be my grandchild. Even that you do not know, says the young priest. They go back. The guy that runs the reformatory drives them back to the church. The old priest says, "Come, let us walk." The young priest hangs back. The old priest turns and says, "What is it, my friend?" He says, "I'm ashamed to walk with you. I ask forgiveness for my ugly words." "You mean about the girl? You're quick to understand. I'm old. I've learned some things. You are forgiven." The young priest smiles and they walk off together. That's grace. That's forgiveness. So why do we forgive? Not only because in forgiving God forgives us, but what does it do for us? What's in it for us? Nelson Mandela says, "Forgiveness liberates the soul. That's why it's such a potent weapon." Out of my own life, when I was in high school, I had a friend who wanted me to lie for her. She wanted to do something that her grandmother didn't want her to do, and she wanted me to tell the grandmother that she was going to be with me, not doing this other thing. Well, I didn't want to lose my friend, so I lied. Said she was going to be with me. We got caught, of course. We got caught. I felt terrible and burdened by this, even though I didn't think that much of her grandmother at the time. But I went and apologized. I had to do that to liberate my soul because it was weighing so heavily on me. My friend thought I was crazy because she wouldn't have done anything like that. But I had to do that. It lifted the heaviness from my soul. In that sense, it was a weapon for me. There's another story I want to share about the Green River Killer, and I've talked about this before. This is a guy, a serial killer, who killed many young women over on the other side of the mountains. I was watching a documentary on his trial, and at the end of the trial, the victims' families were very angry with him, and they were busy telling him how angry they were and how they felt about him, until it got to, and he was stoic through this whole thing. He stood there like he was unaffected by their anger and how they felt about him. Until it got to this one mother who said, very thoughtfully, "You know, I'm not going to let you ruin my life anymore. I forgive you." That liberated her soul from the influence this guy had had on her all these years. Now, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. I don't know that any of us would be able to do that the way she did, but it liberated her soul. It mends relationships. Just when the old priest forgave the young priest, the relationship was mended. The same with my incident of lying for my friend. I still had a relationship with the grandmother, and she wasn't angry with me anymore. So it mended that. It can stop a fight before it ever begins. If we start with an apology when we know we've done something wrong, if we start with an apology, it stops any animosity that might happen. And I have an example of this too. Our Ashley, some years back, came to see me unexpectedly, rode her bike to my house, and she needed to talk. She was angry with her parents or something like that, like most teenagers get once in a while. And I said, "Do your parents know you're here?" And she said, "No." And I knew that I should have her call her parents right away and tell them where she was, but I didn't do that. And after about 5 minutes or so, a car pulled up out front, and it was her dad, and he saw her bicycle in my front yard. And I thought, oh boy, we're in trouble now, because I was sure he would be upset. So I said, "Come on, we're going to take care of this right now." And so I went right out, went right to the car and said, "I'm sorry. I should have had her call you right away, and I didn't." Took the anger out of him. For about 30 seconds, he didn't quite know what to do, because I think he was ready for a battle. He was ready to tell me how angry he was. And I just said, "I'm really sorry. We should have told you she was here when she first got here." Everything worked out fine. So sometimes the apology or asking forgiveness can take the anger out of of the situation. And finally, God forgives us as we forgive others. It's in the Bible. It's all over the Bible. It's what Jesus said. It's what Paul said time and time again. The same way that we treat other people, God is going to treat us in that sense. So ultimately, it's about you and me, not the other person. It's about our spiritual health and even our physical well-being. It's not about the other guy, except if you want to heal the relationship. So I want to leave you with a couple of other scripture references about this. Mark 11, verse 25. When you stand praying, if you have a grievance against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you the wrongs that you have done. And I want to repeat the line from Ephesians. Be generous to one another, tender-hearted. I like that. Tender-hearted. Forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. So how often should we forgive any wrongs or trespasses? As often as needed, for our own health and well-being, even 70 times 7. I say again, be generous, tender-hearted, and forgiving.